Hi, and welcome to the Score ammunition review video for Slugs and Buckshot. I couldn't find a lot of information online about these ammunitions. Specifically, there seemed to be a lack of video reviews on the subject, so I decided to make my own video review by borrowing the style of my favorite firearms presenter. If you don't care about what I did, then skip ahead to the part of the video where I look like this again, and you'll get the condensed meat and potatoes takeaway version of this video. If you care about how I reached my conclusions, then maybe stick around and enjoy.
Hi. Recently I've seen online a few advertisements for this Score ammunition. It's apparently made by a Canadian manufacturer, and I was curious how it compares to what I would consider standard shotgun ammunition. So I have some Buckshot and I have some Slugs, and we'll see how they compare. Now when I think Buckshot, the first thing that comes to mind is a coyote? I thought that was a strange design choice, but I'm not a packaging consultant. Maybe they just couldn't find a deer that would be willing to sign the image release waiver. Anyway, we're going to compare this Score 12-gauge 009 pellet with what I would consider a ubiquitous ammunition, at least in the area that I live in, this Federal PowerShock 12-gauge 2 3/4 inch 009 pellet Buckshot. The Score ammunition has an advertised velocity of 1,350 feet per second, while the Federal ammunition advertises 1,325. We'll set up the chronograph and we'll see what numbers we get. The gun we'll be using today is this Mossberg Maverick 88 with a 28-inch barrel. I've got the Maverick 88 loaded with 5 rounds of Federal PowerShock 12-gauge 2 3/4 inch 009 pellet. I'm going to shoot from 2 yards today because this chronograph doesn't belong to me. It was loaned by a friend. Thanks, Dan, and I'd really rather not owe him a chronograph. $14.03. $14.19. $13.90. $13.86. And $13.43. Now we'll try the Score ammunition. Now I've got the Maverick loaded with 5 rounds of this Score 12-gauge 2 3/4 inch 009 pellet. $13.89. $13.72. $13.46. $13.57. And $13.45. Let's go see how the velocities compare. Well, we've done the math, and with the Score we got a mean velocity of 13.62. With the Federal, it was 13.88. That's within the variance of 1 round to the next, to borrow a phrase. Both of these ammunitions performed above their advertised velocities, which is good, but it could be due in part to the barrel length of the Mossberg. As I said, the Maverick 88 has a 28-inch barrel. That's a lot longer than some barrels, and we don't know what the test guns for these ammunitions was. Is there a difference between these two ammunitions in terms of velocity? Probably not. So what's the next step? Let's check out the shot pattern. So let's test the patterns of these ammunitions. I've got a couple targets set up at about 15 yards. I'll shoot the one on the left with the Federal ammunition and the one on the right with the Score ammunition. I forgot to mention earlier that this Mossberg is equipped with a modified choke insert. Let's start with the Federal ammunition. So with our first shot, we got 9 hits on target. I'm patterning a little high, but for consistency I won't change my point of aim. We'll cover up these holes with our proprietary shot hole cover-uppers, go back and try again. This time we have 5 visible hits on target, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here on the edge of this mess, and I can only assume that the other pellets were still in the radius of the shot cup when the cup and the shell hit the target and put a hole through it. We'll cover these up and try one more shot. Well, this is the result of trying this at 15 yards. I picked 15 yards so that we would get more shots on target, but it seems that we're also getting shots through the target and through the backstop. We'll try this again at 20 yards. Well, we tried patterning this ammunition at 15 yards and then at 20 yards. At both distances, because of the choke of the gun, we're seeing quite a tight pattern, and additionally, this target board is fairly thin, so the wad is going right through and causing us some difficulty in deciphering what exactly the pattern is. We'll go back 25 yards now and hopefully get some better results. Well, we tried one more time for 25 yards, and we're having the same problem. Plus, the pattern is harder to read. Maybe the problem was with my backstop meant for 22 and not with the ammunition. So, because we have good results at 15 yards, we'll try the score from 15 and bring back the federal target that we used at 15 yards. I've covered up our holes with the pink proprietary cover-up so it's easier for you to see on camera. But from my count, we have 8 on target. I don't know what happened to the 9th. Let's go back and try again. Got the second shot covered up with the green cover-ups, and we can see that the pattern is remarkably similar to the first shot. Let's go back to 15 and try one more shot. Well, I covered up the shot holes with yellow cover-ups this time, and to create some clarity, I aimed about 3 inches to the left, and you can see the group is about 3 inches to the left. However, the pattern is about the same as the first 2 shots. Well, I've got our ammunition switched around so that they're in the same orientation that you saw the targets on the backstop. What can we learn by looking at these targets? Well, it looks like the patterns between rounds of the ammunitions was fairly consistent, even though the federal was slightly hard to read towards the end because of the damage caused by the wad hitting the backstop. Maybe the federal pattern is a little wider, maybe the score pattern is a little tighter. It's hard to say. I would like to talk about the price of these ammunitions, not specifically the monetary cost, but relative to one another. Now, I paid 60% more for each shot of federal ammunition that I fired today than for each shot of score that I fired today. I'd say that's an important difference, especially if cost is a concern. If you're using this as a training ammo and you just want to go out and shoot some rounds, I'd like to pay 60% less rather than 60% more. And here's a close-up of the patterns for each ammunition. Is this pattern worth 60% more? You'll have to decide that for yourself.
Well, because of the time of year and the time of day, it's getting dark out, so we won't be able to test the slugs today, but I would like to talk about some of the intricacies of the slugs. When I compare these slugs visually, I immediately noticed a difference in the amount of recess that each slug has. Hopefully you can see that there on the camera. I was curious why there was that difference there, so I decided to dissect the federal slug and the score slug. Well, inside this federal slug, I found the wad and a 1-ounce slug. I know because I weighed it, and this lead slug was 439.5 grains. Yes, a couple grains over an ounce, but still an ounce. When I dissected this slug, I found this apparatus. Essentially a lead slug that's mated with the wad through friction and a couple of ribs on the wad. I haven't seen this design before in a slug, but I don't make a habit out of dissecting slugs. Normally I shoot them. Anyway, I was curious, so I also weighed the lead from this slug. The lead from this slug turned out to be 373 grains. That's definitely not an ounce. I thought, okay, maybe I made a mistake, so I dissected another score slug. I found again this contraption. I took apart the lead, weighed it. Well, 372 grains. Definitely not 1 ounce, as advertised on the packaging. So I sat there for a moment and thought, well, what about if I weigh the wad and the lead? So I did, and according to my scale, it was 437 grains, 1 ounce. I put the other one together, weighed it, 427 grains. Basically an ounce, depending on how picky you are. So I found it interesting that Federal is advertising a 1-ounce slug, and the slug weighs 1 ounce. Score is advertising a 1-ounce slug, and the slug does not weigh 1 ounce. But the slug and the wad that it's attached to does weigh 1 ounce. To take it farther, I weighed the total amount that the wad and the slug from the Federal, and it came out to 488 grains. Again, that's a lot more than the total 1 ounce combined we had with the plastic wad and the lead slug from the Score ammunition. Well, I thought, is that just a difference for Federal and Score? So for kicks, I dissected a third slug. This is a Winchester Super X 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce rifled slug. When I weighed just the lead from this Winchester, the projectile weighed 437 grains, 1 ounce. With all the accoutrements, it weighed 490 grains. So about the same as the entire wad and slug from the Federal. So I just thought it was important to point out that there's a different design to this Score slug, and the actual lead projectile from the Score is not the weight advertised on the box. Additionally, I weighed the powder from each of these. The Federal had 38 grains of powder. The Score only had 31 grains of powder. I took apart the Winchester and weighed the powder. It was 36 grains. So we have 38 grains, 36 grains, 31 grains. In the second Score, there was 32 grains, but close enough for my measurement. Well, it's been a couple of days, and today is quite a bit windier than a couple days ago, so you'll have to forgive the wind noise if the camera picks it up. Clearly it did, I'm voiceovering. But now, it's time to shoot some slugs. I have a Federal 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce maximum rifled slug, and I have our Score 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce rifled slug. Let's set up the chronograph and see how the numbers compare.
My apologies for the disruption and for the sudden shift in the scenery, but the wind in the valley picked up very abruptly and the camera stand was having difficulty standing up on its own. However, I did shoot 5 rounds of both ammunitions past the chronograph. For the Federal, I got a mean velocity of 1,602 feet per second, only 8 feet per second less than the advertised 1,610. For the Score, they advertised 1,550 feet per second on the box. I got an average of 1524. That's not bad. Now I should have mentioned this in the first chronograph section, but chronographs don't always agree, and certain conditions can affect their readings, but you already knew that, didn't you? So, what about energy? Well, if these ammunitions had projectiles that were of the same mass, we could infer that the one with greater velocity also had more energy. However, as my dissection of the ammunitions revealed, this is not the case. So, using the 373 grain reading that I got from the Score ammunition projectile, I calculated an energy foot-pounds of 1,923. That's not bad. With the Federal, I used an ounce, because that's what the projectile actually weighed, and I got 2,409 energy foot-pounds. That's a lot more, 486 energy foot-pounds more. I'd say that's significant. How about the accuracy of these projectiles? I should mention that before today, I switched out the choke attachment. We're using the improved cylinder bore attachment because Mossberg says that it gives the best results with slug projectiles. I can't say that that is true, but I'm just going by what they say. Now, I shot 5 shot groups onto 2 targets. This is the target I shot with the Score ammunition. This is the target I shot with the Federal ammunition. Is there really a meaningful difference between these 2 groups? Maybe, but they're pretty similar. Now, part of the inaccuracy in these groups is due to me and my lack of practice shooting slugs out of this gun. Maybe I should practice more. Part of it is probably due to the gun, and I'd like to think that at least in part, the shift to the left is due to the high winds we were experiencing in the valley. Now, I'm going to wait for those winds to subside a little, and then we'll try something else. Well, if you believe the weather network, then the wind yesterday was about 100 kilometers an hour, with gusts of up to 140 kilometers an hour. Now that it's calmed down a bit, we'll go to somewhere that's a little less exposed and try something else.
So we have 2 heavy-duty concrete blocks, and we'll shoot this one with the Federal slugs and this one with the Score slugs and see if there's a difference. Well, at 15 yards, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference. I'll go back to 25 and try it again. Well, the score shells were just too powerful for the heavy-duty testing table. I'll clean up this mess and see if I can find any of the slugs. Well, after a bit of digging, I recovered what I think is 2 slugs. There was this slug, which appears to be intact and it is mushroomed out very flat. Any thinner and Thomas Dolby would write an album about it. I also found this, which is 2 fragments of what I think is a slug, because it's about the same size as this one put together. I assume these are the score slugs because I found them next to these, the separated plastic wads from the score slugs. So it appears, upon contact with the hard surface, the plastic separates from the slug and can no longer contribute to the overall momentum of the projectile. I didn't find any lead over here on the federal side while digging through the snow, but I did find a couple of wads. No sign of the lead though. I want to know if we can get a sense of expansion without looking at fragmentation. I've got 2 orange soda jugs, a 4-liter jug of water, and some fleece acting as a backstop. Let's see if we can recover the slug. I'll go back to 25 yards and shoot it. Well, that was pretty cool. We got some interesting fragmentation. I recovered this portion of the federal slug, which was in the jug of water, but we saw some fragmentation. The wad of the slug was stuck halfway through the fleece. There was a hole in the back of the fleece, and the rest of the slug is somewhere in that 10 feet of snow behind me. Well, I've got another setup. We'll go back and try again with the score slug. Well, somehow I've hit the water jug behind the soda jugs without hitting either of the soda jugs. I'm out of water jugs, but I'll go get some more soda jugs and try again. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't find any trace of the score slug, so we're going to have to do an unfair comparison. We have the score slug from the cinder block test, and we have the federal slug, and I think the other part of the federal slug from the water jug test. Both have good expansion, and they seem to penetrate just fine. Some of you may be asking, how does the score ammunition work in an auto-loading shotgun? Well, I picked up this Winchester Model 50 a couple days ago from Cabela's for $89.95 Canadian dollars. That seems absurdly low to me, but they assured me that they tested it with snap caps, so I bought it, took it home, gave it a clean, once over, and did a function check. I haven't actually shot any live ammunition out of it yet, so let's see if it works. And it seems to function quite adequately. Off camera, I fired several more rounds with the Winchester, and I had no malfunctions. But let's try and repeat that with a different autoloader. I don't see a problem.
So what can we say about our score slugs? Well, for both ammunitions, they seem to have equivalent and devastating effect on the solid targets. The expansion seemed comparable, even if we were doing a somewhat unfair comparison, because I couldn't recover all of the slugs that I shot. And in terms of accuracy under less than ideal conditions, both ammunitions performed about the same. However, I do have to come back to the fact that the score slugs are only putting about 80% of the same mass of lead downrange as the federal slugs. So they just can't have the same energy. Now, astute viewers who recognize my borrowed presentation style might have expected a meat target demonstration to see how that reduced energy results in a change perhaps in effectiveness on the intended target. But with the situation being what it is, with the price of meat being what it is, and with my budget for this video being somewhat paltry, That just wasn't a possibility for today. That being said, I can think of two distinct advantages that the SCORE ammunition has over the Federal. One being the cost. Now again, it's going to vary, and I think the cost actually recently went up at the retailers that I am familiar with. But the SCORE slugs cost about 40% less than the Federal did, and that's a big difference, and it might be a key difference if cost is a main concern for you. The other advantage might be recoil. Personally, I didn't notice a big difference between the SCORE slugs and the Federal slugs in terms of felt recoil, but depending on you and depending on your firearm and depending on the ammunition that you're used to discharging from that firearm, it might make a big difference. The SCORE slug does weigh less, and the total mass leaving the end of the gun for SCORE slugs is about 50 grains less, so theoretically there could be a difference, but it will depend on you and depend on your gun. For me, it's not really a big factor. So if you're using this ammunition for target training or practice, then it might be a good choice. If I was going to use it for hunting, I would want to make sure that I tested it on a suitable analog medium before trying it out on the real thing. Now, in regards to the Buckshot, I have to say that I was very impressed by the relative performance of the SCORE ammunition. It had a comparable velocity to the Federal, and in my opinion, it held a better, more consistent group than the Federal ammunition. Now, a more experienced man than myself once referred to Federal Blue Box as crap, and we did see some evidence of that today with the retention of the pellets in the shot cup at 15 yards, but the purpose of the demonstration was to compare SCORE with other widely available economy ammunitions. Federal is one of those economy ammunitions. I haven't been able to find Winchester Super X in stores for quite some time, so I just couldn't compare it today. Now, a question some people might have is about the reliability of this ammunition. I only fired about 50 rounds on and off camera, but so far I haven't had a single issue with feeding or cycling, and it seems to work quite nicely actually. Here's where I have to talk about what I perceive to be the biggest drawback to the SCORE ammunition, and that is availability. Now, I have seen a lot of advertising online for this ammunition, whether it be on gun forums, gun classified sites, even firearms dealer sites. I see advertisements for this ammunition, but I couldn't find it almost anywhere. So I went onto the manufacturer's website, and they have a short list of distributors that may or may not be comprehensive, but within 50 miles of me, there was only 2 distributors listed, and I live within the proximity of a city of more than 1 million people, so I was surprised that only 2 retailers are selling this ammunition. The first store that I went to only had the waterfowl shot. They didn't have Buckshot, Slugs, or the target load that I see advertised everywhere. I got the ammunition that we use today, and previous days, from a guy behind the counter on the second story of a Chinese food market. Yes, he had a business license. I did check. But even he didn't have the waterfowl load or the target load. So it seems like the ammunition is pretty hard to come by unless you know what you're looking for and where to find it. And that might be a reason that you don't choose to use SCORE ammunition, even if you were impressed by the results of the Buckshot like I was today. Or you want to use the Slugs as target or hunting. So, with all that being said, I hope you learned something from today's presentation. You'll have to decide if this ammunition is the right choice for you and your intents and purposes. Thanks for watching, and stay safe, have fun.